Hello, everyone. Here we are again with Matthew. And of course, today we will talk about Angular resources. We will go over the RFC and play with some code. Matthew?
Yes, wait. What I am.
Okay. Here.
Oh, I'm live.
Yay!
Welcome, everybody. You have some people in the chat. I see we have some people in the chat.
We have a
Hi,
lot of
Thomas. Hi,
people in the
Chao.
chat.
Hi, Heine. Hi, Michael. Fuck. I hear myself in the background.
Michael, Thomas. Colin,
So yeah, we
Chao.
wanted to do a small we wanted to do a stream on the latest hot topics, which is the resource pattern that the team has designed and presented through two different RFCs. One more dedicated as a big picture of the concept and the possibilities that it will enable in the future. And the second one more practical, which is what you love the most. It's APIs, how they're shaped, what they allow. And maybe the things that are missing for you that we're curious to listen to also comment on, propose some alternative, and yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yes. I'll share the screen quickly.
Let's start with the first one, the architecture.
Yes. So
the idea is, as you know, Angular has introduced over 2 years ago signals, like we have the regular signal, the computed, the effect that's able to react on some signal changes. More recently, 19, we had the link signal, which allowed some kind of synchronous derivation. And now we are reaching on something way more complex, which is expressing states with some asynchronous data. So basically, the idea of something asynchronous means that you may not have the response when you need it. You're waiting for something. Also, how can we express something that's not there yet, that will arrive at some point, and how do we handle errors, the status, and etc.
But yeah, to learn more, I think we should go over the RFC somehow.
Yes, I see that Chao already wants some code. You want to create a custom resource, please. We could do so every kind of resource. Maybe that's kind of a kind of exercise that we also could do. I saw that Thomas Trajan posted on Twitter already a mutation resource, like the idea of what we could do, because one of the ideas of resource is like, yeah, it's a primitive, but you could build on top of it. But we'll come over this a bit later. Please do.
Also, we can say that. Would you say that resource is a TanStack query mini or not?
It's more like something that. So the idea behind resource was not to replace a TanStack query. It's more like it's an idea to provide from the framework a primitive you can build on top of it. And I would pretty much expect that TanStack Query Angular provides its own resource, maybe like something like a query resource that would represent all the concepts that TanStack Query implements. And with something that is very familiar to Angular and that will integrate into the ecosystem. So when you say it's like a mini, in a sense that, yeah, it allows to pull data, exactly that, but also it will allow other libraries and also some compatibility layers to build on top of it.
Got it. Okay, let's go over
yes,
RFC
please.
now. Angular is in the process of a transformation, of course. It started 2 years ago? No, probably earlier.
It's a bit, I don't know. Do you remember when Signal were presented, like in the RFC?
I don't think that's when Angular transformation started. I think it started with the inject function. That thing basically sent
I mean,
Angular to a completely different path.
let's say V14 with also the
Yes.
standalone, etc.
I'd say inject. Inject was there.
Also, it's the same
on
period.
Yeah, it was on the same level as standalone, but both really changed how Angular, is used today, at least for me, and I guess for also a lot of people.
So yeah,
We proposed
the standalone RFC was 3 years ago. The Signal RFC was 2 years ago. So and now we are into the resource one.
Yeah. It basically injected the transformation. Yes.
I mean, it's the whole idea that we continue to build something new. I mean, it's not that we're building something new. It's like there are some new ideas that the team was thinking you would like, and even better, you would love. And that's actually what happened. I mean, when you see today compared from 2 years ago, say, okay, Signal, I love my observable, but like today you want to have signals as much as possible when it matters because they're synchronous, you can read it everywhere. That's right.
Yes. But here, I think Chow wins. I'd go back to IAP because that's where Angular transformation started. So,
by the way, you can expect some news on Inject, I think soon.
Hey, no spoiler alerts. Just kidding. We proposed making Angular a reactive web framework with signals. Yay! Since then, we shipped a number of Signal features in the framework: Signal computed, reactive inputs, model, I love model, Signal queries, bidirectional RxJS conversion utilities, and migration tooling. At this point, we have confidence in the story of synchronous reactivity in Angular, so we want to go on the asynchronous state now. And of course, that's where a resource comes in. So how should the framework deal with async? What did you say to that? How should the framework deal with async? Should it deal with async at all, or it should just give us, I don't know, synchronous reactive primitives?
I mean, you could say that the framework already handles async kind of well with observables, the async pipe, etc. But
is that
in the end, we still have the issue that the problem with async that it's not synchronous. You cannot read it, and it makes it more complex. There is one thing I don't like about what observable allow. Imagine you get an observable from some typings and you subscribe to it. Do you know if it's gonna be the subscription is gonna send something synchronous or asynchronous? Do you know that?
No, you cannot.
No,
just by looking at the type, you cannot.
You cannot. And the thing is that it's purely an implementation detail that you might get something synchronous or not, makes it very difficult to reason to what will happen with some observables. So, I mean, they're great when you are in a mindset of working with streams, when you have events happening over time. But for some states, and even Ben Lesh said it multiple times on the social networks. Ben Lesh is the creator of RxJS. RxJS is not made to represent states. So we need something new, something that is just like we had with Signal, something synchronous. So I think like it was really interesting to go to the same path of having something that is synchronous with resource, but that is capable of loading things asynchronously.
Great. Yeah, I think the same. Like observables are there, but when you start to handle state, sometimes just by looking at them, you don't know if you'll get that state now or tomorrow or never.
And also, I remember something that happened to me very often while developing, where I used a pattern where on my component, I had like a compound latest, which waited on several services to send me some observables. And on the compound latest, I created the observable and it was passed to the async pipe in the template. And sometimes I just got a blank component. Why? Because only one of the observables didn't send anything. I was like, I was stuck waiting on some observable, I didn't know which one, that didn't emit. And this is one of the issues. You need to wait for something that you don't know which one exactly didn't emit to get all the data. And it made the reasoning and the debugging way more complex than what we could do today with signals. Just say, okay, I have a default state and I will get something much later. Yeah, Amen, this is relatable. Good. Oh, Michael,
Yeah.
same. I mean, we all have the same pattern, I think. So we probably all end up, if we have the same complexity, all with the same issues.
Yes. Well, let's go over now. So basically, signals are designed to handle that synchronous state, and every signal has a well-defined concept of its current value. However, not all state in applications is synchronous, exactly. Data must be fetched from backends, loaded from async APIs in the browser, or pulled from user input. That doesn't happen instantaneously. Ultimately, the state shown to the users, of course, must be synchronous, because if you're showing something asynchronous, probably that thing is not there. So you're probably not showing anything. So the UI must show something at any given moment, and even if the requested data is not yet available, if the request fails. So when you click on let's say, to-do details, you cannot just leave the user there looking still at the to-do list. You just probably want to move him over to the new page. Maybe show a loading spinner there if needed. And of course, allowing the developer to cleanly express this derivation of sync state from async sources is a major goal for the framework. So basically, Angular going into the async realm of state. I think this is the first time Angular touches async state when it also comes to, change detection, if it ever changes that, or I don't know, the router. Of course, before it gave us observables to play with or to understand when things would, come, but were they really asynchronous state, or they were just events, or like hooks where basically we could, let's say, connect and listen to the framework telling us something. So
I
by
think
having this, yeah, tell me.
Yeah, I think the important word in this sentence is the derivation. So we've seen that with computed with the linked signal, we pushed for derivation everywhere, meaning that if you can get some state from another one, it should be defined by this relationship of derivation. And well, the resource, we're pushing that concept even further and saying, okay, even async data can be derived from the parameters of your state. And plus that, like it says, that an async operation might be pending, so you are waiting on some data that is not loaded yet, so you have nothing, or it can have an error. I don't know if you
I
can
have a
hear my
loud
cat.
cat. Yeah, I can hear your cat. Maybe she thinks different from you. Maybe the state shouldn't be derived.
Maybe she knows more than me.
Yeah, probably.
So we can go a bit further, then show the resource pattern also below.
So we observe two prominent design patterns which incorporate async sources into synchronous reactive systems with signals: the resource pattern and the suspense pattern. Okay, chat, which one do you like the most?
So do you know what the suspense pattern is?
If you're an Angular developer and you know it, then great.
I haven't touched React that much, so I couldn't say much about the suspense pattern.
I don't know what Cha would say to that. Resource. So when it comes to resource, it's something that I've played a little bit on when, let's say, trying Solid.js. And I really liked it. Basically, you just can derive that asynchronous state. While with suspense, I always, I don't know, felt like I was hiding something. But after I saw when I said hiding, I was hiding my source of, let's say, asynchronous parts. But when I saw the Signals 2.0 video from Ryan, and of course he was using signals to derive the whole thing of, let's say, using the suspense pattern there with those signals, it really made me think, okay, this thing is really cool. Like basically you just don't show anything, or the parent knows what to show when the child is not ready yet, using that signal. Let's async signal in this case. Okay, in the resource pattern, asynchronous sources are represented by a reactive type called resource. Resource represents an asynchronous operation that might or might not have yet completed. Is it an asynchronous operation or asynchronous derivation? Anyway, it exposes signals that communicate the status of the resource loading operation as well as its value.
The operation is the loading. The derivation is actually the result of saying, okay, from the parameters you get a result, and the whole process is a derivation. From the argument to the result, and the operation happens in the middle.
Got it. So we can say that the loading, so the is loading true would also be the result of that operation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like an operation emitting multiple times if it was RxJS world. So basically having that behavior subject that emits a lot. And of course, resources are a form of explicit asynchronicity. However we read that, it's a long one. A resource always has a value which may be undefined. And if that resource is in a state where it has not yet loaded its data. Additionally, a resource always has a state which communicates the status of its loading operation. In other words, resources convert an async operation into synchronous information about its status and results. Okay,
and there
I've
we have
seen
a
this.
good example where
Yes.
here is just so the HTTP resource is the first custom resource built on top of the concept of resource, which just takes some parameters and uses the HTTP client to return the result of an HTTP request. And what it allows is that you can have, as you can see in the template, so you just define the resource as a state, as a derived state with async data, and you say, okay, until while I'm loading, I show the spinner, and when I'm not loading anymore, I will show the user data that has been loaded. So user data is the name of the resource, and then you access the result of the resource by invoking the signal, the value signal.
In our case, user data.value. So we shouldn't go too much over HTTP resource, I guess, because that's part of our.
Yeah, we'll come. We'll discuss it more into the API part of it.
So the suspense pattern, the one that React uses. Again, I don't know about Vue, but also Solid also was using, and now probably will use it even more with 2.0. The whole idea of suspense pattern is built around implicit asynchronicity. And of course, another name for this pattern is async signals. So the whole idea of this async signals is to, if you read it on a template, that signal read, if it doesn't have the value, it will throw an error. And the only way to get that, let's say, value to show up there is basically to have a value. So for that asynchronous, let's say, operation to have finished. Otherwise, that signal throws, suspense catches it and says, okay, I need to load the fallback state until I have that signal. The moment that the signal has a value, basically suspense hides, in this case, the fallback and shows the component needed for that. The idea is that maybe you don't have a signal read here, so you probably won't have a signal read there, but you use it directly inside user profile because you got that signal from, let's say, an injected service on that component. Suspense in this case would still work, but now the parent wouldn't know if it needs to use that fallback there or not. So you basically are hiding that dependency of user data from the parent. But that's good because the parent can always say, if my child component is not there, then probably I'll need to show some fallback content. So basically this is about,
yeah, I'll probably say the same thing. So it's really two concepts of saying either you have explicit asynchronicity with the resource concept, or a implicit synchronicity with the asynchronicity with the suspense, where you don't know yet if it's loaded or not. So as you can see, there is no expression of the concept of loading. It's just you pass it the data and they call it fallback. So you can, if the data is not available, then you fall back to something else. Like for example, here the spinner saying that, okay, the data is not ready yet, so I'll show some spinner for you.
But this also now also moves that responsibility of who shows that fallback content. Is it the parent, or is it let's say the child component itself? With suspense, of course we can inject, if we have that explicit asynchronicity, if we can inject that service in the in the parent component and do the same thing. Like if the data is not there, just hide that user profile and show the fallback. But by being explicit, we can at the same time just go inside that user profile and do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Chao now says, better read my comments. We will go to that thing. And maybe you want to join the stream to protect your opinion, maybe. So
after we go to the section that says that in the design the Angular team choose to went with as the explicit asynchronicity of the resource. And as this was mentioned, so it makes it very clear which part of system are async and which are somehow sync. So for example, reaching out for the status, that's totally sync. You know that status, it will depend, it will update over time, but this one is, you can read it. And the value you can read it, but it can be undefined until it's loaded. So this is why you will have some things like has value. And there is something interesting is like, for example, in case of error, should we throw an error if the loading has an issue?
So something like, if I have these to-dos here.
Yes.
And if I'm, let's say, constructor, and have, I don't know, console log, base to-dos, that value. If this fetch throws,
yeah,
should this signal, like the value signal, throw an error or not? And if
right
that
now right now the implementation doesn't throw, it just doesn't update the value, but you only have the info on the status and on the error. Saying the error signal will tell you what the error message is, and the status will tell you that the resource itself has error. But you could make a case that value should throw, for example, saying, okay, the real state and the value of my resource is that I have no value, I have error, you need to act upon it.
On this case, for example, if my value signal throws an error, I'd like to have something like suspense that catches it, just like it does for if data is loading or data throws an error.
And this is where probably there will need to look at if we need to build a new syntax for the templates to help the developer improving the DX over error handling with async data, of course. I think this is mentioned a bit further direct in the RFC, that in the perspective that we could do. Yes, it's a bit
We
further
will
in
go.
the further research section. So basically, I think we talked already a lot of what a resource is, how it behaves.
Just so we are here. So basically, a resource enables us to have a function that we can call. We have a loader there, and that loader can fetch some data. In this case, I'm using fetch. And of course, we can access the data using that value. But that value sometimes, or by default, will be the thing that you pass, of course, as a type or undefined. And
it's
that's
undefined
where,
if you don't define the default value.
yes, exactly. So there's two things to this. Here, we have this completed to-dos. And what we do, if we want to just have, for example, not have this has value thing and just say, hey, I just want to return to-dos.value. And of course, filter based on the completed. We can see here that value, of course, as an object is possibly undefined. So we always have to check if that thing has a value or not. And has value here helps with type narrowing. As we can see, this thing doesn't, throw an error or TypeScript error anymore. And the other way to fix it, of course, would be to, I don't know, just say, this thing is optional, so just return 0. But I think has value in this case works better. And
of course. And there is something a bit strange in has value. Show the signature.
Yeah.
It is
here.
not a signal.
Yeah. So has value is not a signal.
But behaves as such because
yes.
it's a predicate. I mean, it's the return time is a predicate, and the has value itself is what we call in TypeScript a type guard. So it will ensure after calling it that the type of yourself is of a certain type. So this is why
in our case,
has value.
This is why and in our case, basically, it basically removes undefined from that type. Yeah. So it's basically a resource wrap, but without the undefined. So, of course, the best thing to do here is at least how your, I'd say, default value would look like. And in our case, it can be just an empty array because it's just a list of to-dos. And in that case, you don't need to check if has value because you know that the value will always have a default value. And of course, the type.
The issue is if you do that, is you don't have any error checking. And I see, for example, I see a man saying in the chat that it could be better to return the error than returning than throwing. And this is maybe where I don't agree with because it would mess with your typing. So what's great with TypeScript is that you can describe what you will get. And since the value has something that is expected, it will be defined around the typing of your own resource. If you end up returning something that is not describable, so you don't know how the error will look like, how it's shaped, returning the error will just mess up your types and it won't be typed for you. So I think I'm not saying that we will throw on the value, but it would be a good idea. But also, it will also mean that we would need to have some syntax around this to help developers writing templates that are readable and make sense, and somehow also consistent.
Got it.
I think, Rainer, yes. I think that throwing makes a lot of sense because your resource is in a narrow state, so the value has no meaning at all, and it will force you to also implement some kind of error handling in your templates, saying that okay, if my state is invalid, I need to show you something that makes sense. Throwing is awful, but errors are awful. You need to handle them.
Yeah, but as Charles says, repeat after me. We need error boundaries on the template.
And this is something that needs to be talked about, of course. And error boundaries are something that you can see in the React world, where your function is not executed the same way that the templates are executed in Angular. But you could have, I mean, it probably a topic that needs to be investigated, how error could be handled with this new pattern. Keep in mind that resources are pretty new. The team doesn't know everything about them yet. And it's kind of great to see the whole community embracing them and trying to play with it. And this is also the first time that we've shipped an API saying, okay, here's something new. It's totally experimental. It will probably evolve over time. But first, play 2 months with it or 3 months with it. And then we will prepare an RFC like we did yesterday. So you can answer with experience. For those who have played with it, you can say, okay, I spent a few months with it. Here's my feedback. Here's what I see is missing. Here is my comments and things like this. Exception-driven development is awful, but error are awful. That's the thing, and this is why I think only throwing would be a mistake. But there needs to be things around it. Also, you need to have some kind of pattern to express that's how the error would be handled, and the dedicated error channel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just like RxJS did. If the thing throws an error, you have an error channel that you can basically depend on it.
I mean, we have the error channel, which is the error signal.
Yes, but how do you? But then, if you have an error, you cannot now change the value anymore.
No, you would have to. This is why we need to have something that express the error state at the template level, because it means if there is an error, there is probably something that needs to do a retry. Sometimes it could be automatic, but sometimes it's manual. Let's say, like if you, I don't know, Twitter feed is frozen. Sometimes it's a network error. Just relaunch, and then you have an explicit action from the user, so which could trigger the reload. So, like I said, it's. Just like I said, it's.
I agree with Amir here. I think there should be a way to specify whether or not to keep that previous value of the resource on error or loading, rather than resetting back.
We will go through that because this has been brought in the issues before the RFC, and it's already one of the items that get discussed in the second RFC, the one on the APIs.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you click reload, whatever happened to the value or to the error or everything else. Great. Wait, resource value withdraw if I check it without resources error.
I'm not saying it will. I think it could. I mean, right now it doesn't, but it could make sense that there is some kind of expression of error in something that has no meaning outside of it. I mean, returning the default value, if you have specified it on a resource that is an error, that would be kind of strange because you're explicitly saying that, okay, I have a value, even if you know that something wrong happened. But then again, this will be discussed and shared. And if you have some ideas around this, I think the RFC is a good place to comment on this.
Rainer says, you also have to expect that I access the value also in TypeScript. I'd have to use try catch every time. Yes, but the thing, that's the thing. If we had this, let's say, implicit asynchronicity, then you probably wouldn't need to use that try catch, because by having that suspense boundary, that signal read would just go up. And at some point, you still have to use suspense. Maybe it's your parent component or your app component.
I think what Rainer is saying is that if you call the value inside not the template, but inside the component itself.
Yeah, wherever. So that's the thing with Angular, that we have TypeScript part and the template as two separate things. At least we think about two separate things. But in Solid, they are one function. And that function is not the component, it's just a wrapper. So
Rainer is making a good point that throwing will mess a bit things up. And I think it's great that we discussed that, because in the end, it would have to be something like a try-catch pattern, or saying that, okay, I will need to do a pre-check of the status of my signal, of my resource.
So something like here. Where is it?
It's in the first one, I think.
First part.
What are you looking at?
No, I need that custom maybe, or is there no custom template?
There is no,
Oh, there's no.
one time there is a suggestion of an add async in the template. If you look
Oh,
for
is it
add
here?
async. Yes.
Okay.
So
yes.
template, but just mentions the waiting data. The error isn't mentioned here.
Yeah, and I think we need that error part a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If that ever,
But also look at the end of the sentence, which expresses the dependency and allow management of result loading and error state. So, I mean, we will have something probably around the template for that management of async information, which is represented by the resource, and how we would.
So in our case, it would be like to-dos that value maybe, or maybe just to-dos.
Maybe directly the resource, and you say, okay, then you pass the component, then you get the data of the resource.
I don't know, to-dos that length here, that value maybe. And then
maybe it would even return you the value directly, then loading, and then error. That could be one idea.
And the error here, I guess, would be some template magic string, just like we have for track by. I don't know. I guess anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we don't have something for defer.
Mm-hmm. But Xiao is saying
because on defer we don't have the error.
Potentially throwing when reading the resource value sounds crazy. But somehow this is what Suspense is doing by, of course, having a narrow boundary. So at least with some custom, some async block that would have probably some more behaviors than just being about the async loading and the resource and everything. I come back to Rainer's remark is that it will also impact not only the template but also the pure JavaScript code. And of course, it would need to be thinking about how we want the code to look like in the TypeScript, and how it helps express the eventuality of something not going as expected. So it's like, in the end, the API should express the intent of the developer and help him also remember that maybe in some cases you need to cover not only the main case, which is the one when you get value, but also the one where you get an error.
Yes. Evgeny says RFC says that they didn't pick suspense. Yes, I think Angular is not going with suspense.
It's not a suspense, yes. What I'm saying is that the suspense is about reading a value that's not available yet. Here we are saying we're discussing in a few past minutes, as if that value doesn't exist because the resource errors. What happened in this situation? How do we want to express that? But maybe I'm getting way too ahead of it, and we are, as you can see, it's not really mentioned in the RFC.
Using defer is great because we can utilize the minimum parameter for the resource deadline before showing a loader. I think if we have an async, I don't know, directive or I don't know, block for resources on the loading part, we can just say, just like defer, use that minimum there, and it should maybe work the same as the defer block. And this, of course, would help not. Yeah,
I think probably using the defer block is not the right. Wait.
No, it's not about using defer. It's using that loading minimum.
Yeah, the same concept of it. Yes.
Yes, and I like that because you don't have to show a loading spinner, and the thing will look even faster. if it's, I don't know, 200 milliseconds. Okay, tricky question. I like it. Matthew, you mentioned you never know when an observable changes the value. Do you know it for a signal when it changes? Because similar
I
is
don't
valid for
think I
errors.
said that you never know that when the observable changes the value. It's just like you don't know when you subscribe if the subscription is going to be synchronous or asynchronous. That's what you don't know. With signal, you know that when you read the signal, it's going to be always synchronous. And do you know, because it's similar, it's valid for errors.
And we don't like throwing errors there, I guess.
Yeah. Rainer wrote too much
Yeah, because
Java
that error
and
can
had
come
to handle
synchronous
errors.
or not, if it's on an observable.
Nice. Maybe go a bit ahead with this document.
Signals are always async. That's what we know.
The
Effects are
synchronicity
async,
of
I'd say.
signals is async, but reading a signal is sync. This is what matters. I mean, we're not talking really about reactivity here. It's just about reading states.
Yes. So resources placed in Angular. I like this part. Signals in Angular are more than an API for developers. They are a shared contract, a language that the framework and the developer can use to communicate about things that change. Yes. Angular understands signals when they are used inside of a template, and it can also produce signals for values, for example, for inputs or models. That's true. And of course, view child, view children, content child, and that things, as a way of allowing the application to understand when those values change. This is basically saying Angular speaks in signals. Of course, we see Angular resource concept as serving as a similar purpose. It's more than an API for making requests. Right. What do you say to that, Matthew? Where would you use resources?
And it's not, when he's saying that, it's the rest of the sentence is really important. It's a structure that will tell Angular which part depends on which part. So it will be a graph of things depending on each other. And this is what matters. So telling Angular the dependencies, so it expresses the dependencies between some informations. Yes. And this is why it's not only about loading, it's about defining dependencies between things that need to be loaded.
Things that are synchronous, known, and asynchronous, maybe known.
And it could be also a chain of things that are asynchronous.
Yes. So for that case, we would have multiple resources, something like, let's do some code. So if we have some to-dos, and then based on the maybe some selected to-do, we show some to-do details, like selected to-do, and then we have, I don't know, to-do details. And for this, we'd have the request. Let me import that signal. Of course, on the loader part, we'd have something like this. No, this would be, I guess, request to do. Should we make this undefined? So if we make this thing undefined, basically we're telling our request here that if this is undefined, please don't run the loader. And I think this would be on an idle state or what state?
It remains idle, yes.
Great. Of course, here we can use to-do.id.
So yeah, what you're defining here is the relationship between some information and so the selected and when it needs to perform something. I mean, it's weird to have it selected into a request.
Am I kidding?
Oh, if you want to get the details. Yeah, the details. No, I'm good.
So if we have to do, it says no infer to do undefined, but here it says that.
That's because we have a typing issue where we return undefined still on the loader parameter. That's a typing bug that we need to fix. It is known. Yes, we're making friends along the way, Michael. We got two Michael in the chats.
Yeah.
Will this react to the request change? Yes, it will.
Yes, so basically the whole idea here is that every time this selected to do changes from undefined to something else, this loader will fire. So
I think maybe what is missing, just show that it's what NEI is doing here is exactly the same as doing an arrow function and invoking the signal itself.
yes.
I mean, the selected to do on the request. If you do here an arrow function and you invoke the signal, that's exactly the same.
This would work the same way, of course. Yeah. And this fixes, I guess, this one, or no?
No, it doesn't. It's exactly the same. Okay. It's a bug that we do not remove the undefined. Yeah, TypeScript bug.
Okay. Okay.
In our typing, no, it's not a TypeScript bug. It's a developer missing something.
This to do details. Let me show something here. Maybe I'll do something like this. If the selected
I like that you do inline templates.
Yeah, always. Should this work? Where is this to do coming? Okay, I'll just do this. If the selected to do, then if to do details has value, then we want to show that value. And of course, otherwise.
Yes, exactly, Evgeny. So the request is the reactive part of a resource.
So Matthew, has value and value doesn't work on templates, or
no? I think we also have a typing issue on this.
Okay, good. You know where I'm going.
Again, oh, of course. I mean, it's a as you remember, it's experimental and it isn't polished 100% because we know that it will evolve a bit before it's promoted to the next level, which is developer preview.
And this thing should return us, I don't know, just the title and completed. Good. Details that completed. So I guess this should work. So if I click here, maybe, no, we have to click, not update, but do something else maybe.
I think To-Do apps is the #1 example we see for every web framework.
I'll make this.
Good job.
Shift a lot.
I don't know. I mean, it's an implementation detail.
Yeah. So we have that loading, and of course,
it happens to Rainer, it's exactly what it should do, but doesn't work today. Has value should tell you. But it should tell you only if you're based on the default value. So has value will remove the undefined. Yes.
Question.
Yeah, of course it should work. Else it wouldn't be much sense. It wouldn't make much sense to be a type guard.
Yeah, if has value worked on the template, that would be great at least. So in our case here, we have that loading. And let me go to the network tab to see what also happens. So here we don't cancel requests, I guess. No. And in order to cancel those requests, we need that abort signal and pass that to the fetch part here. You see, that's why I like RX resource. So I don't have to care about those things. Come on, network. Now throttling. Let me throttle. Great, canceling works.
Oh, you're such a power user.
Yeah.
So what NEI did with the abort signal, which is something native to the browsers, you were able to cancel async requests, and one of the first API they implemented using the abort signal was the fetch API. So
Yes.
And
so this thing works natively.
the
You don't need-
resource provides an abort signal when it tells the previous async function that was invoked to be cancelled. So it will trigger the signal, and the signal will cancel the fetch itself. And the signal we're talking about here is not a signal in the sense of Angular signal. It's the signal of a board signal. Yes.
Yeah.
Same name, different concept.
Yes. How can I move this thing down here? Into this. So
should I troll a bit? You should use Tailwind.
I have to install so many things. Or just, flex direction column. Yay. Yeah, great. So that thing basically just loads. Let's go to the RFC. Where we left it. What about observables? Well, the goal of using resources as a common async primitive is in contrast to the intermediate state we're in today, where signal has become a...
When I hear observables, I think about Michael like jumping into the conversation. When I say Michael, it's Michael Latke. Number one fan of observable, I think.
Then I'm also number two, because because signals are great for, as I said, synchronous things, but when it comes to events, you need something to handle those. And most of user interactions are events, so observables are great. And of course, signal has become a common primitive for synchronous state. An observable still serves as a common asynchronous primitive, of course. The team sees resources and observables as serving fundamentally different purposes and use cases. Observables work best when used to model events over time. Yes, while resources is concerned with asynchronously derived state. We can say the same thing sometimes for observables, because sometimes state is derived based on user events instead of, some value that changes.
So you can see, you can say that, that states could happen. I mean, the mutation of the state happens at the end of a stream of events, but the states exist before and the states exist after. So the stream of events is like an edge between two nodes in a graph. It's like the transition from one point to another.
And with observables, it would be moving that state over time, or pushing that state over time.
I mean, you're pushing the delta, maybe you're pushing the new state onto the state itself. That's the problem with observable, is because you can't read them synchronously. You're like, okay, you're like caching the previous result.
But don't we do that with, let's say, resources?
Yes.
No, with the resources. When we say,
because like I said,
a signal changed.
The state exists before any event was sent. That's one of the problems with the observables. You need an initial state that you don't have. And by defining something before any events happen, is like you have a state that exists instantly, synchronously, before any events was sent.
Yes. Yeah, got it. Let's go over Angular async future with resource, with features like defer and incremental hydration. Angular is significantly improving its capabilities around managing and optimizing the loading and execution of application code. However, today the framework has very little visibility into data dependencies. Yeah, that's also true, because most of the time Angular has been like, we manage the UI, you manage the state, you give us some observables, we handle with async pipe maybe, or whatever data you give us, we just render everything. And you can store that wherever you need. But with resource, Angular is basically telling, I guess, as developers, tell me more about your data in order for me to optimize, I guess, the execution of that component code, or maybe loading that data for you when we think it's best.
That's the point that I mentioned then in the future of the future research that we have on the framework is like, how will we be able to leverage this to improve performance, to improve DX, for example, etc.
Yeah. So with resources, we see the potential for Angular to solve this problem and take more central role in orchestrating and optimizing data fetching operations. Can we have resources on the router, please? Having a shared contract for data dependencies will allow application devs to delegate management of the data fetching lifecycle to Angular. Now that thing sometimes scares me, sometimes make me, okay, I'm just give that thing to Angular, because now I have to sometimes define my data dependencies in a way that Angular understands. And I cannot just create my own solutions sometimes. For example, if I want to load data and I want to make the most of it, I have to play by Angular rules. In this case, it would be playing by the resource contract. And if I create something else, then probably I won't get the most out of it when it comes to performance and maybe developer experience. So before, calling the resource TanStack query mini. So basically, by using that resource, we are tied to Angular even more. I don't see that as a bad thing, because Angular is a hard dependency when used on a project. So together with code loading, this will give Angular a holistic view of loading operations within an application, especially around the application lifecycle of server rendering or client-side navigation. So I guess this means that Angular can start that data fetching maybe on the server, and the moment that your client loads, you also have that data there. So depending on how you use the application, or how you create your components and how you, let's say, order your, let's say, data fetching, Angular may optimize on various use cases. So for some pages, start that API call on the client, and maybe for the initial load, say, hey, start that on the server because the user needs it immediately. So we don't have to wait on the client. But our belief is that this will result in improvements to both, of course, developer experience of the framework, as well as the user experience performance. So improving for both.
Well, yeah, but what matters the most to our audience tonight is really the DX. How it will improve you to express the async loading and to make your apps more maintainable and easier to debug. I wouldn't say it's the most important case, but this is the one that will interest a lot of people. And also, Michael's also asked now, resource build like resolver adjacent. They will be related, very related, because a resolver is like you were defining an async method, a function to load some data. And that's exactly what resources are. They are the expression of that async data. So it will probably be some kind of integration of async dependencies that will block or not the rendering of your components on routing.
Yes. Alternatives to data fetching within components, the lovely async pipe. I tweeted some days ago about it. The reason is because I just had too many issues with it, basically CLS issues, because fetching directly on the template basically is a story for failure. When it comes to CLS, you're causing too many layout changes by loading directly from the template and not preloading that data and showing something synchronous.
But also what it mentioned in the first sentence is the problem with the async data here is that sometimes it's sync, sometimes it's async, you don't know, and it can delay your whole interface to show.
But for that, it depends on what you want, I'd say, because if you delay too much, the next frame, you have bad IMP. But if you now load everything when the data is there, like you basically will cause CLS, so layout shifts. So what you want something
what you're talking
in the middle.
About here. First, what you're talking about here, it's the Chrome web, it's the core web vitals.
Chrome.
So
yes,
core web vitals. CLS is cumulative layout shifts. INP is
INP is interaction to the next paint.
Yeah.
So the moment you click a button, you want to see something to be changed on the UI.
Yeah.
So the UI.
How long it takes the app to react on changes?
Yes.
On interaction.
In our case, yeah. So, and when it comes to this part, we want something in the middle. So if we change, I don't know, the tab, we at least want to show that the tab changed, but also maybe sometimes not show a loading spinner if it's, let's say, if the data can be there in less than 200 milliseconds. So at least we can have that synchronous rendering and not show a loading spinner. So not show two UIs flashing really quickly, because that also is I'd say pure, not pure, poor, let's say, user experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you get if you have the subscription that is based in the template that's triggering the loading of your data.
And of course, Angular cannot do anything to resolve these problems, as it doesn't have any awareness of the data dependency. That's why Angular wants to put that, yet. Of course, as Michael Small says, the minimum time of defer is good for the better you get. Yes, exactly. Yeah, some UI response, a ripple effect is also valid for IMP time. Yes. An alternative exists today in Angular in the form of route resolvers, but the ergonomics and semantics of resolvers make them difficult to use for this purpose. So basically in Angular, we can always, instead of fetching those to-dos, I don't know, directly in the component, I can just go on my routes file and be like, resolve to-dos, and there pass something like, let me type resolve function. I guess that's what it is.
I never used resolvers. I hate them because they're blocking the UI on showing something. This is why I'm not a huge fan of the resolvers in themselves. It's because they're blocking the loading, and we should have something that enables to start the loading, but not blocking the navigation to the component.
But sometimes I like resolvers because they enable us to start that data fetching earlier.
You don't want the resolver in themselves. You want to have a point. You'd say, okay, it's good to start loading at this point, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
This is where I think we will have some kind of things that is halfway to a resolver and to dependency definitions by saying, okay, for this component, I have 3 resources. So here is what I give you. This is what the component will get. I will start firing the resources as ASAP on navigation. So you show, imagine a skeleton on your component, and when the resource resolve, you get the data displayed on your component.
But mostly how I've been using resolver is mostly like inject some service, some to-dos service, let's say, and say, or preload in this case, to-dos. And this helps me now just say return true here. At least that's how I've been using
misuse. That's a misuse of resolvers, right?
I know. That's why I need a better API for, let's say, to do exactly this thing here.
Yeah, this is something I kind of agree with. You need something that says, okay, here are it's a good starting point for start loading data. But actually, you could do that with the environment initializer.
Yes, but can you do that basically on every time you navigate on some page? That's why you need that.
No, because it will be initialized only once. Yeah, I get your point.
So basically I need it only on, let's say, hot navigations in this case, when I move on the page.
Rainer is asking a good question. Will the resource in the route get destroyed once you switch to a different URL? We don't know, since nothing has been really designed around it. But it's a good question right now. So this also around the topic that I just discussed before is when you route on something, then your the environment injector related to that route will only be initialized once, and once you navigate away, it won't be destroyed. So the question is, will the resources have something a different behavior? Maybe, maybe not. This is part of the design that the team needs to work on. Router guards for that is also an alternative, but not a correct one, I would say, because the guards are here to just tell the router what to do it's like a hook for the router and sometimes prevent some navigation following some rules. I'm not saying that's what you're doing is bad, because we don't have a better alternative, but it's not the primary intention of the APIs, either for the guards or for the resolvers like you're doing. You're muted.
Yeah, before I learned about resolvers, I was, doing that thing basically with cards. So, but because resolvers are supposed to return data, I know that it's better to at least now move it, that resolving part or preloading part at the resolver. Anyway, let me remove this. So yeah, where we left it.
I think we can continue to the important part is the potential of this API.
Yeah,
just what's funny is when discussing the RFC, we were like, should we share the future insight, or would it trigger too many questions around this and not focusing on the RFC itself?
I think we can make some money from Michael.
I think what would be really funny is, like, each of us should write some code and the other just comment it, and I don't want to say shits on it, but like, oh, I don't agree with that point of view for that and that reason. And
yeah, I think after these new things, not stop coming, but come. And let's say when they are available, we should start building some apps on stream. Just
maybe discussing some tools you could do around them. Discussing some tools.
Yes. Tools,
because as you might know, some of you might know, so Enea is a maintainer of the ng extension library, also alongside with Chow and some others open source contributors. Yeah, ng extension.
Yeah, there's a lot
of utilities that they wanted to contribute to the community, and there are a lot of community contributions too. It's like, I'm not saying that all APIs are good, but having a single point where there are a lot of tools where the community can challenge itself. So saying, okay, this one is good for that reason and that reason, but it's bad for another reason. It doesn't put the pressure on the framework team itself to provide those functions. So it's kind of good that they go outside saying, okay, we look at the patterns that people use with them, and are they good or not? And exactly, I want to mention this one.
Yes.
There have been a lot of talks around something that would be an explicit effect. We have an open issue on this. I know that Heiner is a huge fan of the concept. It has a lot of advantages, but also makes it more less magical and less automatic, but has also maybe less pitfalls of hidden tracked signals. And the funny part is that we designed this on Slack. I think it was 6 months ago, something like this.
I don't remember. The whole idea is if Angular wasn't shipping something for it and I needed it, it was basically, hey, I need to maybe create it myself. And I created, of course, with Matthew over Slack, iterating on the idea. And we came with this API. And I use this a lot, to be honest, because I'm afraid of those, hidden tracked signals. Anyway, let's continue here. The future research. So the whole idea of template API for awaiting data. So having like something like async on the template, that would be not, let's say, the suspense part, but would be like async. So I think Svelte has something like this.
I mean, the whole what such API could do is very well to define. Should we give it some kind of dependencies directly, or should some compiler magic being able to pull? Hey, I see that in the async block you're using this component, this component, this component, and those components define their own resources. Then it could be able to pull them and to know when they're ready, and when everything's ready, then display the content of the async block. Maybe. Without any inputs. Yeah, something like this, for example. Again, I haven't seen any design on this. I don't think it has been designed at all, but it's just like random ideas that could happen. Imagine we have a way to express, something where we could express on the component itself what its resources are, so what its async dependencies are, and and of course, not fallback. I would say it's loading and it's error. Else, it's just implementing the suspense pattern, which is not.
Exactly. Exactly. That's where I'm trying to go. Like if I have async here, do I now need to put some resource on it if we ever go this route? And now, I don't know.
That is really depends on how we want to define things. Like I said, we could, because Angular relies on a compiler, and things like defer already rely heavily on the compiler doing some stuff. We could be analyzing what the components have as dependencies. So you could have some kind of magic again, where you don't have to pass it the resources.
So to just have magic, and then I don't know. Going back to that implicit part. Anyway, I'm curious if we ever go with that approach, like have something on the template telling me if that thing is ready or not. Because I remember on RX Angular, we have RxLet basically helping us do that for observables, like let, I think it's called, let me go to the docs to get that proper thing on the template. So the whole idea is to have something like let n, and then of course there have those local variable and template that have something like the suspense part. So while you're waiting,
you're doing what you can do with the syntax that Angular allows you to do.
Yeah, of course, as much as possible. So the whole idea is to, I don't know, show something on suspense like loading, error, and complete.
The thing is, you don't have the possibility to do something as clean as something that would be provided by the compiler.
Of course, because Angular is not.
In terms of feature, it's great. In terms of the EX, is less advantageous as the async, something like this.
Yeah, something that we don't have to provide everything in order to get something back.
Also.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, what were the next items?
blocking and unblocking data dependencies. Yeah, this would be, I don't know, best solved by suspense, but I'm not going there.
And the question is it something also related? We need to keep in mind that it's not only the client part, there's also the server part. So how do we represent something that is blocking, something that's blocking? We could very well having some async data on a SSR page, and you communicate what are the async dependencies that are not resolved, that should be resolved in the client later, etc.
Yeah,
So
as
we
Differ
are
is
the
doing.
boundaries between CSR and SSR.
And I think with Differ, we already have that when it comes to component loading. And
yeah, somehow,
should
yes.
use Differ for data loading?
With Differ, that's a question. We already have some issues around this. People wanted to have some async loading data pattern linked to the Differ. Whether it's Differ, whether it's an async block, it's very well, it needs to be defined how we want the pattern to be expressed. Because what I like about the Differ block, it's not only the feature, it's that it expresses the intention of the developer. When you see a Differ block, you just see, okay, I know that the developer wanted that the content of it is lazy loaded, so it will not have be loaded as part as an legally part of the current component. So we need to have APIs that describe not the feature but the intention of the feature.
Yes. Oh, prefetching data dependencies.
Yeah, that could
really
be just to improve the performance of imagine page transition. Imagine you are on a blog on a blog, and you could say, okay, you have a notion of what's the previous page, the next page. You could very well say, okay, when I'm on the page, preload the previous one, the next one, so you can navigate instantly to the next page.
Yes.
For example,
or we can use something like speculative links. My colleague Chris Holder basically has a talk on that one, and I really highly recommend to take a look at. So basically, by going on a page, we go and try to speculate on what the user probably will click next, and then we just preload that data. And for that, we need, of course, a clear pattern for having that prefetching part on the resource, maybe, or on the framework. So framework giving us the, let's say, the tools to easily do that. Router loading state. So this is basically telling us that maybe someday the router can give us something like, I don't know, have some data that are asynchronous, the to-dos maybe, and here we say, yeah, just return a resource maybe, or inject a service like to-dos store. And I don't know, to-dos resource?
Maybe.
And then
again,
the
goal of this section is not saying we have, if we had some designs, they would have been shared, but it's really about what it enables. And the shape of it is really to be defined and to be designed.
So here we just have to do inject, I don't know, some, what would be route data? I don't know.
What I don't like about this is, I mean, how do we link in a type-safe manner what we define in the router and what we define on the component itself? That's also what I don't like about the resolvers. There is no type-safe link between the router definition and what you get in the component.
Well, for example, what we, yeah, the only way to solve that is to create these things in a way to have them type checked or have the compiler.
This is what I would love to see in the new router, is improved type safety between data that is defined at the router level and data that is used at the component level.
So have something like 10 stack router for Angular with, I don't know, 100% type safety. One thing
I mean, this is
about
something
data
that
is
that should be a goal, achieving as much type safety as possible is
yeah, of
something
course.
sane. In a sense also that today TypeScript is way more mature than it was 10 years ago.
Yes, of course. That's why we can do some of these things. Except signals. We cannot still type check signals or type narrow signals safely. Okay, deadlines, we won't go over that. Server-only data fetching. Why do I read this somehow like server components? Something that
it's like,
only
I mean,
loads
it's a topic that's important enough to just at least think about it. It's defining in the sense that's how Next uses it, React uses it. So saying that resource could affect how we think about this is worthy of mentioning. And the same of streaming for SSR. Streaming is just about being able to know where you're waiting, when you're waiting, and when you can continue sending responses to the client.
Yes.
And also, we were talking about error before. It's like, how do we want to express things like failure handling, retries, and recoveries? So yeah, that's basically, that's what we discussed before with the async block. Should we leverage a compiler to define some things in the templates, some dependencies, etc.?
I don't know, sometimes depending on the compiler, to me looks scary because that thing probably will go and change my code. And when it comes to asynchronous data, not knowing the framework behavior when it comes to the data can go.
And it won't change the data. I think it's just, it would express, it will just reach
change when those data are reached. Like if it goes like on compiler level and that compiler tries to optimize things, how do I know it's not optimizing for bad? Like doing too many, I don't know, API requests instead of doing, only the needed parts. That's the thing. Going compiler.
Again, we're speculating on things that are very, very vague today.
Exactly. It's like,
so that was the first part of the RFC, talking about more the concept of resources, what it could enable for the framework, what the future could look like, the future topics that will be investigated to improve mainly DX and performance for your apps.
One thing I loved about this resource thing is that it was released. There was no RFC first. Just, hey, here's an API. Go play with it. Please break it if you can. And of course, tell us what you think about it. And that's why the RFC is for.
Yes, and exactly. The goal was really to allow developers to provide some enlightened feedback. So only after using it, but you can give after using it, you can give better feedback than if it's just something new and we say, okay, there is something new, just give us the feedback right now. It's way more constructive to say, okay, we give you a tool, play with it, break it, and please, once you have some experience, let us know what you think of it.
Yep.
Go to do part 2.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of comments.
Not on this one.
Can
Look,
go
10 comments.
Yeah, but also on this one. 10 comments.
No, it's not a lot.
Yeah, I mistook it with the second one.
It's the second one that's way more active. I mean, developers often.
I get a lot of notifications. I don't know, as you can see from everywhere. So the second part. The second part is mostly what us developers care about, basically how this thing will look like, will be shaped.
Yes. So it's discussing the resource as an interface first, the resource ref, then the implementation resource and Eric's resource, and then First, custom resource, which is HTTP resource built on top of resource. When I say built on top, it's not exactly true in a sense that it uses the resource and extends it. It just uses the same APIs and adds others on top of it.
Matthew,
So
one
like we
question.
discussed before, yeah.
I don't see the reload method here. Or
so
for example,
this is also something that was discussed in one of the comments. As should the reload part only be on the writable resource? So if you, I don't know if the RFC goes on the hierarchy of the APIs, but there is a resource on top of it. You have a writable resource that you can write on. You know that a resource is you can change its value programmatically. And yeah, that's the parts. Yeah, exactly. So Jean-Baptiste was saying that having a reload can be also weird, and we should have it.
Yeah.
Probably it would make sense that if you give a write-only resource, which is the default resource, not having the reload on it would probably be better. Like the way, if you can set it, you can reload it also. But if you want to just give to a non-controlling component, a component that doesn't own the resource, that doesn't control it, you just want to give it like you do with a subject. You say, hey, I want to just give you the observable part of it, not the fact that you can send value to it. It's the same thing here. Yes, you want to give it only the read-only part of the resource and not the writable one. I think looks like, yeah, Rainer also agrees on this.
Yeah, but I like having reload there. I can just go create a button on my page that you can click refresh.
I mean, if you own, that's the difference between a resource you own that you can control and the one that is just consuming. And it was probably not an omission that it's not here because it's also not the heart of the resource interface. So the resource interface is what's really important. Those 4 signals that represent really what matters to the developers. You want to know the value, and again, it's represented as a signal, so it's reactive. So your application can either trigger CD or trigger an effect on changes. So the value, the status, which is a status of the resource, saying idle, loading, reloading, error,
resolved.
and resolved. Exactly. And local is when you set it programmatically with a setter, with the set function. Yes.
The value here also says signal. Shouldn't this be writable signal? Or there
I mean, it's I mean, in this sense here, it's just to say it's a signal. Doesn't really matter if it's writable or not. By the way, value is not writable. None of them are writable. This is correct.
No, but you can say value.set and value.update.
No, on a signal you cannot. You can do it on a writable signal.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, that on a writable signal, but this is currently a writable signal on resources.
Is it?
I'm saying that, I mean...
You can set the value?
Yes, and you can update it.
Oh, that's part of the... Is it because it's a writable signal that you own?
Yes.
Try to do it a read-only signal.
What do you mean read-only? To-dos is a read-only.
Do we have a read-only signal or not? A read-only resource?
No, the resource has always been, the value has been always a writable signal.
Oh,
yeah. So you can update data locally. At least that's why the local, that's what local means. That because you can locally just update that value.
Let me correct you on this. Go to I know it's on value. Value, you can read on the read-only. No, wait, no. Check. Try to do a as read-only. Yes, that's it. Exactly. To a as read-only on your resource. Boom. And this, you get no longer a writable resource, but a resource. And that's what happened. You can't update it anymore.
Yeah, but I don't like it.
I mean,
I want to have that.
Yes, what I'm meaning is when you create the resource, you become the owner of it. But if you want, if you want to expose it and give it as to whatever, to a component and everything, you don't want, you often want to abstract that and just give it the resource interface and not the writable one.
Let me this because I was just wanted to showcase this part.
Oh, we got some comments.
So basically, we can update the value locally. I guess the status of this would also change to local.
Yes.
And we can do that, of course, by just updating the resource. This wouldn't be the best thing ever. Like this would only, in my opinion, be used for, let's say, the updates, optimistic updates. And of course, after updating this thing locally, you go and make that API call to save to do on the server.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe then handle error and of course revert back. So this is only for that case, I'd say. Nothing more, nothing less.
It could be if it's wrapped into a new signal, but just sometimes you just want to have a value that represents your current state. Imagine if it's a form, you get a value from the server, a form updated, and then maybe you could have something that will resend it again then to the server. Can you highlight Jean-Baptiste's comment on the reload? I think it's interesting. So it doesn't fit the resource derived from state concept because reload is an event and not a state change. So basically, I think it's alongside the same idea that you can set it, the fact that you can say, okay, because we have no caching, we have no way to say, like in TanStack, you can no way to say that, okay, the value is only valid for 5 minutes. Sometimes you would want to say, okay, make sure I have the latest state from the server. You want to express that. It's the same derivation because you still have the same parameter, the same request. You're just telling, okay, you have the same request. I would like you to just return me something fresher. And when you do a reloading, you won't actually reset to default value or undefined. You will actually keep the previous value until you get the new value. So it's like you still have a value, but you're asking for something potentially fresher.
Yeah.
And also,
so where do we continue? Because there's a lot in here.
Continue just.
Yeah, one thing.
I mean,
yeah, I just want to highlight this thing, like
the default value. So the default value,
yeah, like
is something that is optional, and like I said, the default value is what the value of the resource will return anytime something isn't defined. I mean, until it's loaded and etc. And if the request changes, so one of the signals of the request changes, then it resets back to the default value until we get a new value. And there was a lot of discussion on this as
on the naming.
Should we have on the previous value? Should we still have access? How do we have access to it? Should it be provided maybe not as default on the resource itself, having some kind of behavior? Do we want to keep the previous value? Because in a sense that when you are changing the input, you're saying, okay, the previous value is stale. You shouldn't have access to it beside if you explicitly require it. This is what I think Alex has been expressing in the comments. If you look for previous.
Replies. Oh, there's a lot of things here. This has a lot of comments. Okay, I cannot find that now. There's too much. You know what I'd like to do is put this whole RFC into Gemini and ask it, what do you think? And be like, We can give that, of course. Yeah, let's do that. I don't know if we
Okay.
can do that.
No, it's too long.
Yeah, but
Too many
it has a
tokens.
2 million contacts, so it can do that.
So wait. So I want to check.
What else should we talk about?
First, so wait, we can skim around just the different shape of the APIs. You skipped the streaming, I think. That was just before the RX one. Just on top of it, the streaming.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, so initially in the first release of the resources, we only had the loader. Then afterwards, we added 19.1 the fact that you can give it something that gives multiple values, so you can, let's say, update the signal
Value over time.
the value over time. Yes.
So
Basically,
unobservable.
Imagine a use case. You have a WebSocket and you want to have a stream of messages that you get. So your signal is basically your resource is basically an array where you push every new message you get onto the value.
So something like if my, let's say, fetch here is doing something like, I don't know, it has a WebSocket or it's some async stuff. This can be a stream.
I have maybe a half-dirty demo if you want. I can show it to you.
Yeah, if you want to share the screen.
No, I'll let you share. I will give you my link. I need to find it first. So
give it to me.
I said it's a WebSocket. Resource WebSocket. Boom, boom. And you are back here.
Matthew, what is your opinion on previous value versus default value? Rainer asks. You're part of the internal discussions.
I don't have a hard opinion on this. It's I end up agreeing. I think that it's correct that on when you trigger a new loader, a new loading, that you go back to the default value, but we will probably need to provide some kind of access to the previous one, because one of the patterns I keep in mind is, imagine you're on a table, a paginated table, and you want to switch from page 1 to page 2. What often happens, you go to page 2, you have the loader that's on top. I mean, not the loader, the spinner that's on top of the previous result that are somehow grayed out. And for them to be grayed out, it means that you still have access to them. So I think that the default behavior of not having access to it is correct, because your resource represents the actual state. And when you change the request, you don't have, you're not in the previous one. So the derivation isn't correct anymore, but you might want to have access to it. And so having maybe a parameter that allows you to have access to the previous one would make
how
that
that would look like.
I don't know. I haven't thought about the shape of it, nor have I seen the different comments details on this.
Maybe something like this. If not, I don't know, previous value, return empty.
No. I think it's on the. it would have to happen on the
reload.
The fields that we can read.
I don't know, man.
So the default value is just a default value. There's also the question I've seen that should we have an init value, so a first value before
maybe value
anything.
on loading or
value
fetching.
on loading, maybe something like this.
Or
but I think it should be a new property for maybe a dedicated resource that says, okay, a resource that gives you access to the previous value on loading. Maybe. Again, this is something that needs to be discussed. If you have suggestions, if you have specific needs, make sure to express them into the IRC.
I think stream there makes perfect sense, like, because on a stream, I think we just need to have, let me
Now the stream will
out.
give you the whole object. Have you can open my project, my example.
Yeah, we'll do it in a second. So just to give an idea, so the stream would be like, I have some signal, like value. Let's say signal have to do empty. And then here, what I can do is, no, this doesn't make sense here. Would it? So
Now
if
look
I
at the
have
shape of
request,
the stream. I mean, if you haven't used it, it will be surprising of what it expects.
no, I played with it a little bit because I tried to convert some observables. So basically, I need to return the value here because I need to return a signal, but not exactly. I need to return promise of that signal. And of course, I can change that signal over time. So I need, I think, to do something like,
You know that you need to return a signal.
yes, a signal or a promise of that signal.
Yeah, a promise of the signal.
Yeah, so promise result of the signal. And here I can say value dot set of that result. So maybe, but now I cannot have.
But the stream is really like you have a set of different set of values on which you want to iterate.
So if I have request here, I still, this stream I think will be called once. Or
yes, the thing it will be called once, and I mean, go with the example. It will be better to just. So stream makes no sense with fetch.
Or where did you send the example?
On StreamYard.
Oh, yeah, I see. Let me copy this.
A promise of a signal sounds kind of weird. Yes. So basically, what I wrote is a small.
Okay.
Just look at what I'm doing. So I'm creating a resource with the stream property, and I give it directly what I call the WebSocket. So I use some service that just answers ping and pong. I think it's just, oh no, it's me. It just sends a number that increments every second.
So you're creating a signal.
Exactly.
You're sending a message to your WebSocket every 1 second. And then every time your WebSocket has a message, we update the signal, and here we return a signal. And then, so of course, by returning that WebSocket.
Yes. So basically, you return a signal or the promise of a signal in the stream, and that signal is the value that you update constantly. And as you can see, this is a non-reactive resource, so there is no request. But which means that is the stream is only called once. And if you had something here, if you had some chat ID, what would happen?
How I see this is, if I don't have this chat ID here, and I want to click on between chats and have that thing live there, how would I?
The thing it would cancel the stream if you have if you had a different another chat ID.
URL. Yeah.
I mean, and this is why it doesn't match what you wanted to do with the stream before, saying, okay, that maybe the stream could be used to access the previous value. No, it doesn't, because it's really about having a set of value coming over time with the same request. If you change the request, you change the stream. If you change the stream, you don't have access to the previous value.
Got it.
You got it?
Yeah, something like observable. Because observables basically most of the time have been the perfect fit for streams and having WebSockets. Yeah, so why not an observable of a signal if it's a WebSocket?
I think Jean-Baptiste makes also a good point in his comment, is that resources look cool for simple cases, but they're not flexible, composable enough. I want to say you're probably right in a sense that a resource just is a representation of a state. The question is how do you define this? And I would pretty much expect that a lot of applications that rely today on RxJS to combine requests and things like this to assemble some kind of states is that you would have still the same complexity in RxJS, but in the end, you would get a single entry point to that complexity, which is a function, a method that would return an observable, and that observable would be passed into Rx resource, and then you would get a state from this. So yes, resources are probably simple, but the complexity will depend on what you gave it to it. And it will probably be abstracted behind some other codes, probably based on RxJS. I mean, I've been building apps where you have tens of combined latest. I mean, tens of observable in the combined latest. This could be pretty well just a function that you give to your resource
stream, to your resource stream, if it's an observable. Or Rx resource.
Rx resource. When I say resource, I mean I use the name resource as the concept. So if it's an observable, you will reach, of course, for Rx resource.
Seems like a primitive for libs or framework APIs to flesh out, like HTTP resource.
Exactly. So basically the idea with HTTP resource was two ways. It's just to show that we can build on top of resource. Resource is not the tool you will probably use most of the time. You will use what libraries provide to you. So I could very well see maybe Rainer could say, will maybe NGRX signal store expose some resource, some custom resource. We know that maybe Arnaud could maybe tell us a bit on this, but I would expect that Tanstack Query Angular would expose some own resource. So it's really like a building block that you will use the base API, which is the resource where you have value, status, and everything, but you will have access to additional methods dedicated to the purpose of that resource. And of course, everything needs to be fleshed out. This is why this API right now is as experimental. We want people to test it and to find some limitation they see in the usage.
You mean on the basic usage part, or when they try to break it on bigger models?
It's like more when you have a new tool, you want to fit in what your usage are, and sometimes you would just misuse it. And when you report it, was like, okay, this is not how we see it. This here is a suggestions, or maybe you have a right usage. We say, okay, I have hit a limitation. And then there is one that we discussed a lot between the GDEs yesterday. And Rainer can maybe chime in a bit also on this. It's how the hell do we handle? I don't see a need for a signal store resource. That's more probably. I was just asking myself if there was some. I haven't used it enough to say if there would be a need. This is why. Okay, if you don't see a need for now, good. Yeah, I was talking about. Debouncing.
I see resources. Oh yeah, debouncing.
You see resources?
No. I see resources same way I saw signals in the beginning. Before Angular had that, improved change detection, using signals instead of observables was, you don't need that most of the time because we already had that, those patterns already in place. With RxJS, we could build apps, use async pipe, everything would be great. But because signals brought that better change detection algorithm, made that possible. Of course, signals had, how can I say, gave us something to think more about them. And of course, resources for the moment doesn't give us more than just an API that, of course, we can create ourselves. The framework here is just using signals. But if the framework says, hey, we can use this resource thing for you at some point to make it, to make it easier for you to write better applications, faster applications. So it's like Angular providing something that we cannot have by just writing code on our own. And of course, make it the reason why we use a framework and not just JavaScript. So having signals, having resources should give us something more other than, I don't know, something to load data. At least that's how I see it for the moment.
I mean, what I see, the direct usage I see today, resource maybe not that much right now.
Yeah.
But if you want to build a real small demo app, I want to show how do you load some HTTP on Angular very fast. HTTP resource is great for this. It's way better than it was with the HTTP client, where you also had to know what RxJS does, etc.
Yeah.
So it really covers, and this is where I think also where Jean-Baptiste was going, is that it is good for simple use case because we are still at the start and we want to see how it's used by the ecosystem also.
I've opened this 10-stack query here just for showcasing this part of inject query. Basically, this is returning some query from 10-stack. But what if this query was something like returning a resource query? And this, of course, would make it easier to use this thing. Meaning
and also
like,
it means
now the framework can use this.
Oh yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be the only purpose to have something that is shared with a common concept. Is also that it expresses something that can be consumed by the framework, and this is where what's the value in the future is how Angular itself, Angular as a framework, will leverage this new knowledge.
So this doesn't look like a resource, but it's still maybe it may produce some resource under the hood. And of course, because Angular now speaks in resources when it comes to async data, that probably would be something.
That would be great. Maybe in a few weeks, months. I don't know when they have some advanced idea of what they want to do with the resource. Saying inviting some people that work on 10-stack Angular and discussing that with them would be very interesting, I think.
It's not about needing it. We don't have an implicit loading mechanism. The signal store is too abstract for that. We will have to provide the possibility for users to integrate resources into it. Yeah,
that would be some kind of new behavior. But also in the next comment, what he said, it's like maybe with entity resource, but it won't be part of the core. It's like an additional probably behavior.
A plugin.
Yeah,
like a plugin or feature.
This is what I see. It's not like a core feature, but it's something. If there is a need for this, they will probably implement it as an additional feature.
Yeah, Rainer, what are you not working on?
It's incredible how many things he's doing. Also, shout out to Rainer and it's NG News that brings you the best Angular news each week.
Yes. Go follow Rainer. Okay, what else? Let's go. It's been, I guess, now 2 hours.
Almost. Yeah. Maybe go before. Oh, just let's show a small example. I wanted to show about.
So we will be able to make API requests to post data. So like to update state. The first time I read this, that's what I thought. Okay, I can make a post request to update some state. Just kidding.
So that's why the example isn't great in a sense. One of the things that we want to mention about, so HTTP resource is not a replacement for the HTTP client. It is merely an implementation of resource that uses the HTTP client. So it is more a resource than an HTTP client, but it's a resource that uses the HTTP client as loader. So it will help you loading data asynchronously and express that as a resource. So, and as that, as you know, that sometimes you need to do a post request to send some, to get some data. For example, GraphQL uses post request to get data. So this is why HTTP resource allows any method There is no restriction on it, and but it doesn't mean that it's built for imperative making imperative calls to the HTTP client and making what we call either mutation requests or just it's not meant to do changes on the server.
Yep. It's mostly like you fetch data, that's it. You cannot, you shouldn't use it for other stuff.
Oz is saying that resource needs some method to write data. Does it need it? Maybe not at its core in terms of primitive. Will more advanced resources provide it? This is a big expectation, yes. So the question is, how far should the framework go, and how much should be implemented either on your own project or on the ecosystem? I don't think it's a weird limitation because we would go away from the core pattern of what a resource is. A resource is really just some data fetching, but could be used to express things like what Tenstack query expresses.
Like inject a mutation, and then of course you can just mutate data if you need to. And of course handle that in an asynchronous way. Anyway, I won't go over mutate now. But that's the whole thing, that resource is not like the final solution. Resource is the primitive to build on top. So wrapping resource on something that you can make use of be the best way to use resource. It's like using signals. Most of the time when you need an object, you probably use signal store in order to that wraps a signal, but the framework still understands it because it's still a signal under the hood. So that's the whole idea also of a resource, at least how I see it. So if I need to create a page that has a table with pagination, I can use resource just to, and of course, wrap a resource that says, I don't know, create paginated data for this entity. And of course, that thing underneath uses resource, and I can pass that to Angular, and maybe someday Angular can optimize it even further than what I can do currently on my components and templates. So playing with resources on that regard, like wrapping them instead of using that thing directly.
Maybe you should contribute to Tenstack Angular.
Yeah, I've been talking.
Can you highlight the few comments
about it? Yes.
Can you highlight the few comments that we got? I have some things to say.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Alexander. He's using Vue, but also talking to Angular guys.
No, it's not. It's not about using Vue or Angular. It's like, hey, we are JavaScript developers. Hi to everyone.
Same community, web developers.
Yeah, we have 465 live viewers.
Oh,
yeah.
Can you check Oz's comment? So I want to comment on this and then on Rainer. Resource for idempotent APIs. Yes, exactly. That's the core idea when talking about the main pattern. But resource as what you can do with it can become more than just idempotent. And I know just knows it better than us. For those who don't know, he's working on Tenstack Angular.
Basically created Tenstack Angular.
Exactly. Just can you go on the comments? So yes and no. You will see he wrote they would expect this. And what I understand from these comments is that yes, the developers would expect something close to this. Like, for example, we have signal inputs, and to match the inputs, we created the output function, which is not an output signal. It's just an output that expresses the things in a similar way than the inputs. When I think about this, that's okay. We need to have something nice for sending imperative request. So mutation to the server changes, telling the server, okay, this data changes.
How I see
I
this,
was thinking about it, but
yeah, how I see this is it depends. If you have caching on the client side, what happens is that you need those mutations, of course, to be connected to your resource.
yes.
But if you
Then
don't
you
have
go
that
to
caching,
you go to Tanstack query if you want that
Yeah.
caching. What I'm saying is that just going to the base of it is, yes, I understand the expectations that we get an API that is shaped the same way, where you get some kind of status and some kind of value and error handling the same way. But at the core, a mutation request is not reactive. It's something that is triggered most of the time by an event. So it's imperative by a user. It's a click, it's a timer or things like this. So it needs to be something different in a sense how it's triggered. So it's not a resource. But I understand that we should have something that will return something that is closely shaped like a resource, but it's not a resource. So I would say maybe you could imagine something you would call a simpler, easier HTTP client that would return the same way you do a GET, but in response, you don't get a promise. You would get a signal value, a status, and an error. And to jump on Reiner's comment then, discussing a bit what it would mean to have a promise, not a promise base, but an HTTP client that is not relying on RxJS. So I just, for a bit of fun on my side, I checked, so what would it mean to just have an HTTP client that doesn't rely on RxJS? And the main issue is the interceptors. So interceptors are functions or classes defined and they return observables. And this is kind of the pain point, saying, okay, how can we have an HTTP client that doesn't use RxJS, but also supports the interceptors that are defined only with RxJS? And probably what it would mean is that you would have two kinds of interceptors, probably one that are promise-based and others that are observable-based. If your app only uses the one that are promise-based, you won't have to pull RxJS. If you have ones that are already using RxJS, so it would mean that RxJS is pulling your project, but it means that the HTTP client that doesn't use RxJS would still need to be able to call them. So it's kind of complex. I don't know if it's really doable, how it's doable, but mainly it's why do we even need interceptors? Yeah, why do we even need HTTP client? Because Angular loves dependency injection, and it's way better for. Just can you just write some example what happens if you wanted to do a click and do a post on a click?
Yeah.
Without the HTTP client.
You do a fetch, I guess, or post request. Like on
just
update.
Imagine just a click. On a click, just do a request. You call a method on your component, or just write the method on your component.
Okay.
Yeah, the add to do, for example. I don't know. Click. How would you implement it without the HTTP client? But using some APIs provided by Angular. That's what you do in the basics. The thing is, we use the client that is injected because it allows you to access something. I mean, without injection, we couldn't do it. We couldn't access all the whole HTTP stack. So it would mean that the function.
I mean, we could just import it, but the issue would be when we want to test it, maybe. Or we want
not
to
only
change
that,
something
but also that the method is not a ejection context. So you cannot do what you do the same way that you cannot define a resource in a method. You would not be able to have a standalone function that does the get for you. You would still need to rely on some kind of service that is injected. That's my point.
And of course,
yes, exactly. That's one of the reasons that the HTTP client is great. The unit testing the caching,
Sending tasks, caching.
and of course the intercept is very important in any enterprise application.
And of course, HTTP client is recommended to be used with TanStack query.
Cool. Yes. So yeah.
Well, I think we will have to close it at some point.
Also, yeah. So yeah, no, basically the main point I wanted to make is that my personal feeling, which is not an expression of what the team thinks, because we didn't discuss it really, is that we will probably need something that looks like a resource, but it is not one. So something that returns, imagine writing just an interface, which would be a simple client that just returns on get the three signals of
when it comes to handling things that are asynchronous without having to subscribe or await,
yeah,
that's where I really like the create effect or Rx method. Or this is basically create effect from component store, but it's a standalone, or Rx method from signal store, Rx method. And what this really helps you with is that you can call this as a normal function, like, I don't know, update and pass the ID and data. Like you call this, you don't have to subscribe, and create effect will pass the data.
So you're basically defining the future request that you're gonna do, and then you're just invoking it, right?
Yeah, in my case here, it would be just return this post request or put request, whatever. And of course, I can do now on my resource, like update it. And of course, inside of here, I can say on an error, I want to, I don't know.
You're doing something that is very verbose for just something that just the basic use case of sending a request doesn't. What I wanted to illustrate is how would you want to shape something that's just basic request? How would you want to shape it?
Well, most of the time, I also want optimistic updates, and I don't want to be blocked because of how API looks like.
That's discussing something that's already more advanced. What I'm asking you is, how would you want to shape just a simple request today if you had to design a new API?
Well, I don't know. And it's 11 p.m., so I don't want to, design API.
I mean, no, without designing API, I mean, what I would see is that you would just have something that returns the same structure that we have on resource.
Yeah.
That's one thing. I could also see that there is some kind of maybe way to get a promise on this, because it's a single event. So you want to know when it's finished or if it failed.
Yes.
On an error. That would basically what a simple client would do today. So sending the same structure as a resource without being a resource, because it's not something that is reactive. And yeah, that's how I see. Just promise, please. Thanks, that'd be fine. Yeah. Just promise. I think kind of just promise is a short-sighted, because we've seen already a lot of people asking for something that looks like a resource, but they don't want a resource. Actually, they don't know it, but they don't want a resource to send a post request. I think what they like, it's the shape of what a resource returns. A callback could be also a thing. Like
the thing
they
is,
want to have some kind of
if I have a button,
kind of value.
If I have a button and the user clicks on that button multiple times, I want to handle all those clicks. For example, on my case here, on the, let's say, I don't know if this will break my page. Let me fix the page at least. Where is it? Here. So if I click multiple times here, what I also want to handle is what happens to the data. And of course, I can just click here or make that loading spinner, and block the user from clicking. But in order to have that, best user experience, we never want to disable that. We always want to let the user change it, even though the API calls are not finished yet, but make that, optimistic update there for them. And of course, stack those API requests. So having something that allows me to do that in a simplest way possible would be great. But for the moment, only having RxJS there to handle those stream of clicks, for example, with concat map, and I can just say, every time I call this thing, add something to the stream. Or I don't know, exhaust map, which basically will cancel everything else that is coming from clicks until the first one finishes.
Yeah, but again, you're designing something way more complex again. I totally understand why you are doing this, because this is something that people will want to implement, of course.
Yeah, and most of the time, having just a function that you can call that triggers some RxJS pipeline, most of the time would be what you really need. And of course, handle that racing condition there with some operator or with some key or trigger.
Yeah, but basically what you're doing is handling events.
Yes.
And it's the best way how to handle them. I totally agree with. I see that Jean-Baptiste is saying that observable are becoming standard, so they will be cool to use again.
They are already cool.
I don't think they never were cool. I think it's just like they were overused by people that didn't understand why they were great. And I love observable. Like I said here, basic example, handling consecutive clicks to just have the right behavior. Perfect example of what should be based on observable. It shouldn't be a signal. Signal shouldn't be everywhere. We shouldn't ditch RxJS. It's a great library to handle asynchronicity of events.
Yeah, I also agree with Arno here. I appreciate observables more since signals, and as we can see, signals most of the time and only use observables where they are most useful.
Exactly.
Basically, so understanding it makes us understand the difference.
Yes, exactly. It's that you won't hate observables because you won't use them anymore in places where they were shit for.
So you are not forced to use RxJS if you're not observables in this case.
I mean, observable are great. I think we should do in the future, once the implementation lands in Canary, we should do a short stream, like probably a half an hour on the observable API that will be shipped natively on Chrome. What do you think?
Yeah.
Did I lost you?
No, I'm here. Okay. I'm just looking at the comments.
Okay. So once we get the implementation shipped into Chrome 135, we can do a stream on this and discuss it.
Yeah,
would probably be fine. Resource only makes people happy because now.
Oh yes.
I don't know if resource makes people happy because of Node.js. I don't think Node.js makes everyone happy. It's just like it answers problem where you don't need it. I don't think there is a hate for RxJS in the community.
No.
I think Angular developers mostly love RxJS.
It's a 50-50 from the, I think, developer survey. But I'd say RxJS is great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and is great, and it has some really great usages. And just like Signals, wrapping those things to shape APIs that are easier to use. Like, I don't know, the create effect does a lot of things. Subscribes to a subject, I guess, and unsubscribes for you. And it gives you this possibility to have that pipeline there to manage the stream of events in a clean way. And of course, you don't have to subscribe. You just call that as a normal function. Component store basically hit the nail with this one. And that's why I love, let's say, this API, because it basically allows me to do things. And of course, that's the glue code that makes it possible. And that's why I want to see more things being built on top of resource to better understand where that thing breaks when you wrap it. Because if you use it like just a normal, API, then of course it wouldn't. We cannot find too many issues.
The chance. I never had the chance to use the signal store. Is create effect anywhere reactive, or is it just like when you invoke the method that is defined, you just handle it as a reactive
Well,
type? I mean,
yeah, the ng extension version has, like, if we call, let's say,
because this was from the signal store, right?
This was from component store first, and then it went to. So in ng extension, what we did, we also, because update here can be used for updating state, but you can also say load state here, for example, and this can be a switch map. And of course, let's say we want to load based on some filters that, or let's say form filters, whatever. So every time we change those form filters that we get here, we can just switch map, set the request to something else. And this, in this case, it would be some filters that, I don't know, queried. So load in this case is used for getting data, and the update that we had before is used for, patching state. And of course, whatever happens here in the middle will be just updating signals. So in this case here, you can just call, you can have click and have something like load and change the query to that ID. Or you can have this inside the constructor or inside, constructor. You can
so it's
have
basically just defining the stream of the event that starts with the click.
You can have a signal there, something like query, and query now is this that's selected to do ID. So, and this now will be reactive. So you can and I can show now on the ng extension one here. Basically, you can have it's the create effect. So you can have where is it? I probably don't have it as a. So you can pass an observable to it. So it's reactive on the observable. So it basically subscribes to that observable, and every time it changes, this pipeline goes through. And then if here you can pass a signal, and it will listen to it using an effect. And of course, this pipeline still will go through every time that signal changes. Or you can just call it like a normal function and just run that thing once. So it basically understands signals, observables, and normal values.
Cool. Great. I also learned something new today.
Okay. Yeah, you
so
should
maybe
try that.
Maybe
I'll go over some comments.
Just
and then...
one last thing. Can you show one last thing? I sent to you a link on the one thing I wanted to share on the fact that you can pass a parser to the HTTP client. So the example I'm sharing here is based on the non-final version of 19.2, so it's still called map. Now in 19.2, it's called parse, and it's something nice. That's, as you can see, I'm using here Zod. Zod is a
library.
Schema. Is a schema. How it's called again?
I don't know.
It's schema validation. I don't know. That's how it's called. Yes, you define it's schema validations. You defined. If you look at the bottom, look directly into the code. I defined some kind of schema. I mean, in my code, in the example.
Oh, okay.
In the example, you will see down below the component here, I define a schema where I define what is a Star Wars person. It's an example from the Star Wars API. So I say the name should be a string, the height should be a number, edited, it's actually a date time, and film is actually an array of string. And so I define a schema, and that schema has a parse function. And if you give it some random arbitrary data, it will parse it if it's valid, following the rules defined by the schema. If it's not valid, it will throw. And what happens on the HTTP resource, what is great here, as you can see, I have no types defined directly. I only have the HTTP request and the schema. And the return type is actually determined by the schema itself, which means that the schema will ensure type safety and runtime safety. It means that the type will be matching also what happens on runtime. And this is particularly great when you are relying on data that you do not control entirely, which is what happens when you have a remote backend that sends you data. And by doing this, you define just a schema, you pass it by the parse function, and then you get runtime and build time validation. And it's awesome.
But this will throw on runtime, right?
If
the data is not correct,
the schema, for example, you can check it. Just replace string by number on name. For example, you type number here, and then it reruns, and then here check it say, oh, okay, there is a problem for name. You expected a number, you got a string. The schema is not valid, so it's throwing an error. And if you look at the template, it's exactly I'm not showing the value, but the error. The error has a class error which shows in red.
Okay, yeah, got it. Great.
So this is really something that I hope to see. What?
Is it using try catch here to pass it to the error?
Yes, basically the response of the HTTP request is passed to the to bring the back. Yes, exactly. Runtime type. When I mean runtime type validation, it means that we have type validation that matches what happens also checked at runtime. Even better, yes, for third-party API that you do not control. Basically, is responsive that don't throw. Yes, but that wouldn't make any sense in our case. We want to catch the error, so it's even better to throw in this case, from my point of view. So yeah, when I mean runtime and compile time validation is that by defining the schema, you will get a TypeScript type on your resource. And you make sure with the validation of the schema that the data you get at runtime matches the type you have specified. Because you could, if you want, just specify the generic of the HTTP resource. But then it means that imagine give it any generic on the resource.
Yeah.
If you write anything, you could write anything here. Toolbar or blue. Yeah. Imagine this. Remove the schema from the map function. Remove the whole thing. Remove the whole thing. Yes. And here you have type safety by saying, okay, my resource should be something that is blue, but it's definitely not this. It doesn't match. Yes, Chow, we're still on. We're almost at the end.
Yeah, we're.
So what's great with the schema validation is that you get something at compile time that matches the reality of runtime. So the best safety you can get. So I think we went around this. Yeah. If you look at the last section of the API, it says that we expect to see more custom resources built on top of it. Maybe we should do a further stream on, let's try to implement something like a mutation resource ourselves, how we could look like.
Yeah, that would be great.
Before that, let's advertise your next stream, which is on, I don't know the date.
Well, yeah, Chow is coming.
It's with Chow, exactly, in 3 days. Perfect. So on content projection, by the way, just give, can you show Chow's article on content projection?
Yeah, I will.
Because
or maybe Chow should.
I mean, you're sharing the screen. It's a great article that talks about content projection and the limitations and the solution around the limitation. So really enjoy reading it and also learn something around it. I'm not expert on content projection, but
it's a big one, but it really shows how much you can do with it and how much you can't.
And how much probably Chow suffered using content projection, right?
Yeah.
So yes, any last question maybe from the chat?
Well,
Before we wrap up?
I'd say go check out also the RFC if you haven't yet, and
Of course,
maybe leave
both
your comments
RFC.
there. There's a lot of things. Yeah, there's a lot of comments here I have to go through. I need to know everything. Because as you know, we got the new control flow based on some comment on an RFC. Basically, the whole thing changed because of that one comment. So maybe I can see that comment and maybe agree with it. And I don't know. Push more.
Rainer has a question I don't have the answer to. Why does reload not trigger the loader if the request is undefined? I don't know what happens if you reload on a request that was undefined. Maybe it's just an undefined behavior and we need to determine what it does. I unfortunately don't have the answer. We'll need to look into it. It can totally happen that the API has some undefined behavior in some edge cases. This is probably one. So it doesn't reload. I mean, it makes sense if you do a reload on a request that didn't trigger the loading, then it means that you still have no parameters to pass to the loader. So the reload, I would expect it to not do anything.
Yeah, me too. Like if I click something to reload, but that thing doesn't have the correct parameters, like let's say user ID, I cannot have something to reload.
Exactly. So that's I think the correct behavior because we don't have the right parameters.
Exactly.
Is there a use case for resource in Angular 3? Oh. That would be the best question for the transition to the next stream.
Okay. Yeah, loading 3D assets. Great.
That's the thing, Rainer. You don't need the parameters, but you need the URL. The thing is, if your request returns nothing, then it means that you don't have the parameters of the loader. I mean, are you mixing somehow the HTTP resource with any resources here? Because we don't have any request on the resource. On the HTTP resource, I mean. Okay, comment in the RFC sounds good to me.
Yeah, please. That's the whole idea of the stream.
Yes. Oh, best idea. Yes. 2.5 hours. Thank you, everyone, for following us. I see still some people connected. Maybe we'll try to do a bit shorter next time and a bit more code. I'm looking forward to do some shared code session together in here so we can have some fun.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, we will see again in, I think, 3 March. Thank you and see you. Bye-bye.